the sympathetic nervous system is essentially honing you in on what is directly in front of you in order to keep you safe. So by looking at our computer screens, we are kind of putting ourselves into that sympathetic state, which is why when we walk away from the computer, we could be like, whoa, I just feel like a bit overwhelmed by everything.
Hello and welcome to Habit Nerd, a podcast show that knows that few things can have a more powerful impact on your life than improving your daily systems, habits, and mindset. I'm your host, Dr. Bree Hearn, a multi-passionate researcher, lecturer, speaker, and coach. Once a perfectionist who was always busy but not necessarily effective, I overcame illness and burnout and am now obsessed with sharing the science and systems for working with efficiency and habits for abundant health in your mind and your body. Each week, my guests and I share stories and lessons backed by research. So let's buckle up and dive straight into today's empowering conversation. Hello there, Habit Nerds. Thank you so much for joining me today on this episode of the Habit Nerd podcast. It is my great pleasure today to welcome Anna Ferguson. Now, Anna is known as the Anxiety Coach. So Anna, the Anxiety Coach. She is a leading Australian mental health expert and an anxiety therapist. Anna has built an engaged community that includes me of over 250,000 followers on Instagram. She is so generous in the way that she shares practical, holistic mind-body tools, and she breaks down the barriers and stigma around mental health. Now, through Anna's work as a counsellor, a speaker, and an author, she provides really valuable resources for those of us who struggle with anxiety, and she's striving to change the conversation around mental health. Now, Anna is the author of a recently released book called The Vagus Nerve Reset, which is about training your body to heal stress, trauma, and anxiety. In this episode, Anna is hugely generous, she's funny, and she shares really important and practical insights and just really easy tips to reset your nervous system throughout the day, starting from first thing in the morning. And I learned a huge amount from Anna. I know that you will as well. So I hope you really enjoy this episode with Anna, the Anxiety Coach. So a big and warm welcome to the Habit Nerd podcast, Anna Ferguson, author of The Vagus Nerve Reset, a book that I've just devoured actually over the last couple of weeks. Delighted to have you join us today, Anna, and thank you so much for your time.
My absolute pleasure, Brie. I'm excited to be here with you.
Great. Okay, so Anna, we dive into the same question for all our guests here at the Habit Nerd, and that is about what is a habit that you find that serves you, Anna, that helps you show up as the person that you'd like to be.
Yeah, my go-to daily habit every day when I wake up in the morning is to hydrate with electrolytes. And It sounds so oversimplified, but once I started to realize like how important our nervous system interacting with different alarm bells going off, so being dehydrated can really set you into a sympathetic state, I really started to hone in on creating positive electrolyte balance in my body and just using salt to begin with, and then using like sea minerals to hydrate, and that has been a game changer. So if you wake up groggy in the morning, having a bit of salt or warm water with some electrolytes in it really helps set you up for the rest of your day. So that is my non-negotiable every single morning, my daily habit. Absolutely.
We've not had that one before, Anna. Can I ask why electrolytes are not water itself?
Yeah, so most commonly when people are dehydrated, it's not due to not having enough water. It's due to there being an electrolyte imbalance. So if we think about our body as basically sending electrical signals, all neurotransmitters, all of the messages around our body have these electrical charges. And when we become dehydrated, that kind of imbalance between electrical signals in the cells and outside of the cells becomes dysregulated. So when we add sodium, so salt is a natural electrolyte, but also other minerals like iodine, potassium, magnesium, all of these are really important for the functioning of our cells in our body. So quite often when we're dehydrated, it's due to a lack of electrolytes as opposed to a lack of water.
So interesting and helpful. I bang on about hydration a lot, and it's certainly not from a science-backed point of view so much as anecdotally in my own body. And I definitely see an absolutely inextricable link between when I feel dehydrated and how much focus and clarity and, the way I can get through the important things in the day that, matter to me. It's a really simple win for me to just make sure that I'm hydrated. But thank you for adding that kind of extra layer about, the imbalance of electrolytes and the importance of including them. If I could ask further, how would we know that our electrolytes were off kilter?
Generally, I think we can listen to our body. So generally we know when we're dehydrated, but for some reason it seems like an impossibility to stay hydrated enough throughout the day. And I kind of noticed this when I was drinking a lot of water and being like, why am I still so thirsty? And when I started to add in those electrolytes, then I started to notice that I actually feel satiated, I actually feel hydrated, I actually have that cognitive function back. And also like your heart rate isn't kind of jumping around and changing, so you don't have those feelings of anxiety coming up as well. So if you are someone that is prone to anxiety or panic, then staying hydrated efficiently and effectively is really, really important, so that you're not sending this kind of biofeedback that something is off and your heart rate's increasing because the messages are not being sent around your body functionally. So that's really, I think if we can listen, I think if we all listen to our body, we'll all be a better people because of it, and we'll be able to understand what we ideally need. But at the same time, we kind of know when we're dehydrated, and that's generally a good sign that we're needing electrolytes in our body as well.
Yeah, wow. So you mentioned salt. Would it, if our listeners wanted to start quite simply with a practice where they were to wake up and, add some salt to water, what sort of salt are we talking about? How much? How might that look?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question because I think some people hate the flavor of salty water and some people love it. I personally love the flavor of salty water. I also personally just use like natural sea salt. So whatever you can find that has ideally been third-party tested, because there's all sorts of research now to say that there's kind of cross-contamination in salt or kind of additives in, especially in table salt or iodized table salt. So having that natural rock sea salt is the best. Outside of that, I feel like whatever makes you feel the best is going to be the best for you. So if that's Himalayan pink sea salt, if that's natural rock salt, if that's some other type of salt that you want to try, but maybe like half a teaspoon is really all you need, and warm water, because when we have that first kind of step into our day, shocking our insides with some cold water is not always the most fun thing to do. So having that nice warm water with your salt helps the salt dissolve, but it also is just a kind of nurturing way to enter the day as well.
Well, that's really simple. And what's the system that helps you keep that habitual?
I think once I started to feel better, it was a really big motivator. And I think that's with any habit, is when there's positive reinforcement, so you can actually see the change happening physically, physiologically, or externally from you, that just becomes a huge motivator. So I've been doing this for many, many years now, and it's just a no-brainer. We start our morning with warm, salty water or electrolytes in our water because it makes us feel better. To begin with, I think having those cues to start off with, so like putting a cup out, putting the salt out on the bench so that you could see it first thing, and also kind of stacking that habit onto things that we normally do. So we normally flick on the kettle in the morning, so when we do that, then we have our warm salty water. So while we're waiting for the kettle to boil, then we are drinking our warm salty water at the same time. So I always try to stack habits in things that are just worn in like the back of my hand, and that really helps to kind of piggyback new things into my routines and habits. But also giving yourself those visual cues is a really good thing to do. So whether that's putting it somewhere really obvious or writing yourself a note or setting an alarm, that can be a really helpful thing as well.
And you've articulated habit formation, behavioral science 101 there with a couple of those things. Certainly the positive feedback that you're getting, and also, the stacking it and the visual cues. But I hear you say we. Is there somebody else that does this with you?
Yeah, my husband for sure. We do everything
Okay.
together. So it's always good when you have that kind of accountability because especially if I get really busy, like he'll bring me my warm salty water in the morning as well. So we kind of do that for each other too. So
Hmm.
it's always good when you've got a friend, a partner, someone in your life that you're doing new habits with because then you've got that accountability aspect too.
Yeah, thank you for articulating that, Anna. That's exactly what I was hoping you would say. There's that social proximity effect when you're doing something alongside somebody else. So, just a reminder to our listeners, if there is a habit that you would like to embed that's maybe tricky, it is a lovely idea to do the things that Anna's talking about, but also to be around the sorts of people that have the behavior that you desire, whether that's, you're lucky enough to live with that person, or if it's somebody that is a colleague or somebody that is a friend, or even if it is sort of an exercise group or a group of people where the desired effect is kind of the normal behavior. So
Yeah.
yeah, so thanks, Anna. That's so you've shared that your habit is hydration first thing in the morning, and the systems that you've got in place are really super helpful. So thank you so much. What about if we flip that? Is there a habit that you currently have that isn't aligned with the person that you're aiming to be?
Oh, that is a great question. Oh, there's probably a million habits that aren't fully aligned. I would say definitely my inability but desire to multitask on important things. And this is a habit that I think I really need to drop is multitasking because I
Right.
don't think that anything really gets done to the
Mm.
best of your ability when your focus is kind of being pulled in multiple directions. I read a study a while ago that talked about how if you like finish a task, you should have a break in between and then start another task so that you kind of have that kind of break state and then you can shift your cognitive focus onto something else. And I never do that. I have a million and one tabs open. I have multiple projects going on at once. I'm constantly flipping between things. And I think by the end of the day, when you're like trying to multitask and you're not doing the best, it leaves you in a fairly anxious state or stressed out state because you've got again those million tabs open, but metaphorically a million tabs open in your brain to did I finish that task and I didn't quite get to the end of that and I started this one. But and so I think multitasking is definitely a habit that I need to kind of wind back a little bit because it's not super aligned with what you want to achieve in life in creating success.
Yeah, absolutely. I really resonate with that one. Where do you think the habit of multitasking has come from, apart from being a woman in the world? Because unfortunately, I think, that very basic level messaging around men can't multitask, women can, women have to multitask, the whole work, life, family juggle, etc., which is unhelpful. And as you say, research would support that it's very productive at all. But where do you think it's come from for you individually?
I think there's a number of things. I think, like you said, being a female and a woman in the world is definitely one of those things. I'm a new mother as well. My daughter is almost one,
Oh,
so
wow.
I'm a stay-at-home mum, a business owner, a wife, and like all of these things kind of have to coexist with one
Mm,
another, and
mm.
that requires a level of multitasking to do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely, it
But
does.
in terms of like where I learnt that. I wonder, it's probably from my childhood somewhere,
Mm,
but I'm not
mm,
like, I haven't really examined this that much. I would say that I watched my dad juggle like businesses, multiple businesses and home life, and then us as a family kind of working in that rather fast-paced environment. And so that chaotic, fast pace has felt like home for me for
mm.
most of my life. And it wasn't until a couple of years ago where I really started to examine, like, why do I like chaos so much? I seem to create chaos for myself, that I started to be able to understand why my nervous system felt most safe in that environment, and then started to be able to create a new sense of safety. But, when push comes to shove and there's lots of projects on the line, that kind of old habit of trying to get everything done and creating this kind of vortex of chaos around myself seems to be where I land most of the time in terms of just what feels like most at home for me.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a really powerful way to reflect upon it, that in a lot of ways, unfortunately, habits that don't serve us have we've got evidence that they have been productive for other people, or that, you know, people that we've grown up around or admire. And I think we, you know, having children and, you know, being a mum, being a business owner and managing all of the things that you're doing, and an author, that is all really important, exciting work in the world. So we never want it to be, oh, well, I can't do all of those things. It's just a matter of being multi-passionate. But I really love that idea that, you know, I'd be interested in hearing more about at another time the study that you found about breaks in between tasks. I think that would be one strategy. The other strategy would just, I think, you know that it's not particularly serving you. So that's kind of half the battle, isn't it? To just be able to catch yourself and say, oh, yes, old pattern, I recognize you. And sort of, you know, if you are feeling that kind of harried, you know, nervous system activation, you know, your heart rate's up or you're breathing shallow, which I certainly recognize in myself, what a gift to be able to say, oh, yes, this is where I've, you know, trying to juggle too many things at once, and therefore nothing's going to get done, and all the balls are going to fall. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting that even my husband tried to encourage me yesterday. I was working on multiple different things, and I was probably staring up into the distance at one point, just being like, I'm really overwhelmed. And he was like, do you want to come outside for 5 minutes? And I said, no. So even when there is,
yeah.
even when there is that kind of reinforcement, I think there's a huge positive reinforcement that comes from being this busy bee as well, right? Because you're seen as a really productive person. It also feels really good when you do complete things as you're going as well. So you're getting all of that positive reinforcement. So to almost try to retrain yourself to do one task at a time, I think requires a level of almost a replacement of positive reinforcement. Like, how do you shift that kind of idea of, oh, I got so much done, to I got one task done really, really well, right? And so I think there's a level of that that's involved with it. But again, having community, having people around you who do kind of remind you, even if you ignore them like I did, to say like, hey, maybe you need to have a little break for a moment, is really, really important. Because without my husband, I'd just be like flat knacker working all of the time. But there's a hierarchy, right? So my daughter comes first in everything. So she's, if she is sick or she needs me outside of it, then work kind of gets pushed down. And so I think when I do have the opportunity to work, that's when it's like, right, I've got to get everything done in this short period of time.
That's right. Yeah. And I think that's another angle to this. So first of all, I agree with you. It is seductive when you get things done, because, you know, that's what our culture has taught us is, you know, the thing to be celebrated, you know, to have all the things on your to-do list ticked off. And when people say, I don't know how you manage it all, almost like a badge of honor, that is that kind of positive reinforcement for something that's maybe not particularly great for us. But I think I love that you've said that your daughter comes first, because I think that shows a level of kind of values-driven introspection there, that, you know, when push came to shove, I actually don't think it's such a bad thing when you are a parent to lean into work at the times when you can lean into work, because there's a real kind of efficiency there that you sort of are forced into. It's just about, I'd heard this before, but last week I heard the quote again, and I've written it down for myself as a reminder. Just that question, if this is all that I got done today, would I be okay with that? You know, and that's just to drive, there's 6 things, but actually this one thing here, if I go to bed tonight and that's not done, then I won't really be happy with the way today's panned out. So just to take the pressure off things. And that one thing might be a cuddle with your daughter because she needs you, you know, and another time she's happy and occupied, and that one thing is something for work. But it's about being okay with, as you say, a good job of one thing and redefining that as success.
Yeah, absolutely. Having priorities in everything, I think, really helps, because we can create a to-do list as long as our leg if we wanted to, which is totally overwhelming. But at the end of the day, I think if I have 3 things on a to-do list, and often like 2 of those things will be like to make dinner and to clean up the house, and then like one of them is a work task. And so even though sometimes I get into this like crazy, like yesterday my daughter napped for 2 hours, so I was like, I have so much time to do all of the things. And so when I get into those modes, but outside of that, when I am on a time crunch, you really do realize how good you are at like how much time you took to do certain tasks prior to having kids, or even when you gave yourself all day to do something and you took all day to do something.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas if you give yourself 10 minutes, you can go like hammer and tongs and get it done, and you realize like, wow, I'm actually really fast at doing these tasks.
Yeah, and that's Parkinson's law. A task will, what is it, expand to the amount of time that you give it. And I use that when I'm cleaning the house. If I just feel like the house just looks like a bomb's gone off, I might set a timer for sort of 15 minutes, and it's amazing how. And then that is the best use of my time, because once I'm calm in my external environment, then my internal environment can kind of calm down, and I can sort of focus more on that second most important task for the day. So Anna, you are known as Anna the Anxiety Coach. So this is it's an important question that I would really like your insight on, if you don't mind. Can you help us understand the difference between feeling anxious and suffering from anxiety?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a really nuanced difference between the two, because I think anxiety, and I know that anxiety is such a universal experience. Like no one escapes their lifetime without ever experiencing anxiety. And that is because anxiety is this survival instinct. It's how we get shit done. It's how we actually motivate ourselves to do certain things. We need to be aware of uncertainty. We need to be aware of unknowns, and we need to be able to mobilize our body systems in order to take action. Now, anxiety kind of lives in this stress response cycle. So if you think of the stress response cycle as having a beginning, a middle, and an end, the beginning would be like a detection of a threat or stressor. The middle would be when you're in that sympathetic state of, I've mobilized all of my energy stores. I've got like all of this kind of energy now to take action on this task. Then we neutralize that threat, and then we come back down. So even if that threat is an email that you've received with a deadline that maybe you weren't expecting, you think about that feeling when you go, oh no, I've got something to do, and you take action immediately, and then you get that thing done. We essentially neutralize this threat, and so we come back down to a sense of safety, grounded, kind of that parasympathetic sense of open playfulness, intimacy space. Now, where anxiety kind of becomes more chronic is when we get stuck in the middle of this stress response cycle. So we've noticed a threat or stressor. We have that sympathetic activation and mobilization of our energy stores, but we don't down-regulate again. So if you think about going through your day, and there's so many things coming at us in the 21st century society, there's notifications on our phone, computer, someone's calling us, we've got a million, like we've just been talking about, having 1,000,001 things on our plate. Yep. And that stress response is constantly being activated. Mm-hmm. Now, ideally, even if we can't attend to all of these stress responses, once we kind of get to the evening, we start to wind down, we can kind of give our nervous system a bit of a break and come back into that parasympathetic state. Mm-hmm. But for most of us, we kind of stay in this chronic sympathetic activation because we haven't down-regulated or even attended to some of these threats or stresses. So for example, if you are someone that like is just getting bombarded with emails all of the time, and you go, oh, it's too much, I'm overwhelmed, I'm going to ignore them now, but you open it up the next day and they're still there and they're still there, and it just keeps building.
Snowballing.
So you can see anxiety in more of a clinical sense as being this like ongoing alarm system going off in the body. So we don't really get a break, our sleep gets impacted from it, so we start to have these broken, disturbed sleeps, or we can't get to sleep because we're still in this sympathetic state. Sleep is not conducive to getting tasks done or kind of removing threats or stresses. So our sleep gets disrupted, our energy stores get depleted, so we get more and more tired. So then we feel less and less capable of actually doing the tasks that we need to do. And so you can see how it kind of creates this vicious cycle where we're just in this chronic state of anxiety. And so if you are someone that just feels nervous or anxious from time to time because something triggers you, but then you are able to come back down to that sense of, everything's okay, I'm safe, this is where I am in my environment, I've attended to this thing, then that's just feeling anxiety. But if you get stuck in that middle of that stress response, then you would say that that is chronic anxiety coming up for you.
Okay. So it's the difference between almost the trigger being able to be dealt with and then to come back to center, as opposed to it being something sort of more ongoing and chronic. And then, as you say, permeating, other things like our sleep and, our ability to function. Right.
Yeah. And when you haven't slept well as well, more things feel like a threat to you as well as you go throughout the day.
Absolutely.
And so you kind of start to create, and this is where the generalized anxiety disorder kind of comes in. We start to generalize that everything is a fire that needs to be put out, as opposed to just having a far more centered approach of what's important, what's not important, what do I need to attend to, what is actually dangerous or threatening to me, and what is just an email that's coming into my inbox that the world's not going to fall apart. So we start, as we become more dysregulated, more kind of get swept into this vortex, that we start to go like, there's all of these threats around me and I'm unable to kind of put any of them out or down-regulate my nervous system.
Yeah, I really recognize that. Is there, you mentioned generalized anxiety, and I know that is kind of a clinical diagnosis for some people, like a GAD, generalized anxiety disorder. But just for the purposes of this conversation, are we talking about people who are not, clinically diagnosed with something, exhibiting this sort of behavior in the world because of all of the stresses that we've talked about and more?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we kind of we're living through times that are highly anxiety inducing, but I would say most anxiety is generalized anxiety because, like I said, as you are unable to attend to different perceived threats or stresses, more and more kind of gets pulled into this vortex. So maybe at first it was work that was stressing you out, but now your partner is also stressing you out too. And you start to like throw them into the mix of every time they say this one thing, then it sets me off in this pattern of anxiety as well. And so we can see how a lot of people are dealing with the stresses of their environment or socioeconomics or social constructs and contexts as well, kind of causing external anxiety, but then it becomes internal and you start to see things or physiological changes or your heart rate increasing as also being a sign that you're anxious, which kind of creates that vicious cycle as well, that I'm anxious now and therefore more and more is going to be more anxiety inducing too. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. But I want to ask about the start of, so you've used an email that you perceived as threatening as an example. Is it for some people, because there's a couple of people in my life, who I love who do, suffer from anxiety as opposed to feeling anxious, which, I certainly feel anxious often. But is it more so, and I do take the point that generalized anxiety is general in nature, but do different people start with a trigger that is more pertinent to them than somebody else?
Oh, absolutely. And that's going to be derived from like who you are, your family systems, how you've grown up, what you deem as safe or unsafe, because everyone's nervous system is going to feel it, like I was talking about before, feeling at home in chaos. And that was my status quo for a really long time. So when things started to, especially let's say with my husband, when we first met, he was extremely calm and it felt like, oh, something's wrong here.
What's wrong with you? Yeah.
And so my trigger was something that I perceived as a threat because I wasn't experiencing what my nervous system felt most safe, right? Which was chaos. And so everyone is going to have different ideas of safety, and that is going to be when you step outside that sense of safety, that is going to be something that triggers a feeling of anxiety, because what your nervous system tries to do is almost create a situation that brings you back into your sense of safety. So in my case, yes, in my case, I would pick a fight with my husband. So I'd create that chaos and I'd be like, all is well in the world, right?
Yeah. And you've upset him, and then, you're like, what's wrong with you? We're fine now.
Yeah, I feel good now. What's wrong? Yeah. And so I think we start to understand how unique everyone is that is navigating the world, which gives you a lot of compassion for when you don't understand why someone might be triggered or feeling anxious, how we can start to view it from our lens. Like, what are the things that trigger you based on your personal history, your family systems, your environmental context and stresses that are coming into you as well. All of those are going to play into what is triggering for an individual and what is that kind of starting point of that stress response cycle.
Yeah, that's so well articulated. Thank you, Anna. And really empowering, I think, you know, for people to think about doing the work about when they do feel themselves really activated over something that maybe somebody else wouldn't necessarily find a stressor, to be able to say, oh, I recognize that, you know, I'm creating an environment that feels most safe, even though safe would be the last thing that somebody else would describe that as, you know, as in your chaos example. Yeah. Wow. So, you know, I wonder, I'm hoping that our listeners can connect to that, you know, they can think about moving around in the world as a social being, what their kind of internal family system is and what their background has taught them to do and to, you know, habitually relate to will be different to their partner, to their friends, to their boss, to their colleagues. And it's just kind of that, I suppose, that internal social kindness, isn't it, to ourselves and to the people that that we're relating to on any given day. Are you smart, capable, and secretly exhausted? You are not alone. If you're a woman who's done everything right but still feels like you're running on empty, it's time to stop surviving and to start choosing. I'm Bree, the Habit Nerd. I coach women who are done with hustle culture and don't need another planner. They need a better way to work and to live. As an academic at Australia's #1 university, I bring trusted, research-backed tools to your real everyday challenges. As a busy mum myself, my 4-part coaching system matches proven science to your point of need, so you can create habits that last and invest your time and energy where it matters most. This isn't about doing more, it's about doing what is right for you. I will help you feel proud of how you show up at work and at home, for yourself and for the people that you love. If you're ready to feel focused, fulfilled, and in control without burning out, let's talk. Head over to the Habit Nerd on Instagram, where you'll find my calendar. Book a meeting and let's get a conversation started.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anna, given that this podcast is around the role of habits in our life, what do you see is the role of habits or behaviours or tendencies in managing one's own anxiety?
Well, I think we were just touching on the idea of safety, and whatever is most familiar to us, generally what we have grown up in is going to be our baseline level of safety. So if you think of working with anxiety and working with your nervous system, we kind of have to realign that sense of safety to something that actually fits in with our current. So most of us experience childhood, but now we're adults and we have a different set of tools and resources to navigate challenges. We're not that child anymore. And most of us can logically think this maybe isn't objectively safe, but it is what feels most safe for me, right? And so we want to bring our sense of safety into alignment. And the only way that we can do that is to make the unfamiliar familiar. And the only way that you can create familiarity is through repetition. And habits are the best way that we can create repetition and consistency in whatever it is that we're doing. So, for example, with the salt water in the morning, we start by creating something that's novelty, that's new, and that is unknown to the nervous system. So when I first started doing the salt water, it was something that I would do sometimes times or something, I would forget. And so I created like something visually, like it was in my face every morning when I woke up. So I kind of didn't have to think about it. And it's the same with nervous system regulation, working with anxiety, is whatever you are trying to change. So let's say we're working with our sense of safety. And the way in which we want to do that is to start to explore a new sense of safety. So what does feel most safe for me? How can I touch the edge of that? So for example, maybe it's down regulating your nervous system a little bit each and every day. So you decide that you want to have a dance party every morning. And so then we start to create habits around that. How can you have your music ready to go? How can you create a consistency, like I love dancing in the shower or while your kettle is boiling in the morning are really great cues because they're things that we do all of the time.
Yes.
But you continue doing just one habit until it becomes so familiar to you that you don't have to think about it. And then you can kind of see how that has been integrated into your nervous system, right? So familiarity is going to equal safety. And the way in which we can create safety is through this formation of new habits and consistency and practice over time. So the two are inextricably linked together.
Right. And so would you, dancing in the morning, is that a practice that somebody could use to down regulate their nervous system?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's like one of my favorite things to share with clients and to do in sessions and to suggest for people to do, because shaking is if you think of when you get scared, for example, you notice that your hands might shake when you get a fright. And so shivering, shaking, tremoring, just that frenetic kind of movement is a natural way in which our nervous system down regulates. So we can kind of utilize these intuitive movements in different ways to start to use some of that mobilization energy and to down regulate that stress response cycle. So dancing, shaking your hands out, having a boogie, putting on some music that feels good too. So music is really beautiful for activating the vagus nerve. So if you want to dance and boogie, putting on that upbeat music so that you can actually move your body however feels best for you. But I feel like it's such an intuitive, natural way for us to kind of shake off things that have been lingering within our nervous system. And so I highly, highly recommend for anyone absolutely have a dance party every morning.
Yeah, that's a great one. And great to do with younger people around as well, great kind of little practice. And I really like actually that you've reframed that, tremoring, that shaking, that we would have a negative association with, and kind of when our body does that, we sort of think, oh my God, I'm shaking, I must be not coping here. But, the reframe that actually your body's doing its job. Yeah.
I think that's like so powerful, because so many people feel such embarrassment around like when their hands are shaking or their voice is shaky. Like I still get nervous when I do public speaking. I can feel my voice shaking. And so how do I amplify that natural thing that my body wants to do to help calm my nervous system? So is that shaking my hands under the table, like making it bigger? So not trying to, the more that we try to squash or suppress these natural movements that occur, the kind of more unwanted they're going to come and visit us when we don't want them to. But if we make them bigger and we actually just shake with it for the period of time until you kind of naturally know when you're like, oh, I'm pooped, I'm done doing this, then you can kind of keep going and you work in unison and symbiosis with your nervous system that way.
That's so lovely. Your body knows, doesn't it? Like the wisdom is there. Yeah, that's so interesting. And also just a lovely reminder that like what you resist will persist. So you might as well lean into it and kind of make friends with it. I think that's so lovely. I'll that's something that I certainly will take away from today. It reminds me of when I was a teenager and I would be embarrassed if I was, exercising or playing sport and I would get sweaty. And somebody at some stage said to me, no, that's your body doing its job to keep you cool. And it was just like, even as a child, that was such a helpful reframe. Oh, okay. So that's not something to fight against or to be ashamed of or embarrassed about. That's actually a natural response and we can lean into it. And in the same way as, the shaking or tremoring in that example.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've learned from all of your work, Anna, that our nervous system is adaptable and that there are some practices that can help us retrain our nervous system and return it to the calm. So we've just talked about, a dance party. Could you tell our listeners and me, are there any others?
Yeah. I mean, everything can be a resource. I like to use this idea of being the mad scientist, right? So you are an n=1 experiment, and what works for you may not work for someone else. So it's really important to explore with an open mind and be able to go, that didn't feel quite so good for me. I'm going to leave that exercise there and try something else. It doesn't mean anything about you if it doesn't help you down-regulate your nervous system. So I think my go-to kind of strategies, especially in moments where I'm just like, okay, I just need a break, and I do this all throughout my day generally, is the physiological sigh.
Yes.
So if you're just listening to this, then hopefully I can do it justice in explaining to you. But basically it is 2 inhales through the nose and then 1 long exhale. And I like to exhale with pursed lips because it really helps extend that exhale and kind of bring the parasympathetic nervous system online. So when we inhale once through our nose, we kind of do that full breath with a bit of sharp power behind it. So, and then we do another inhale and then exhale. So 2 inhales. And that is the physiological sigh essentially mimics the way in which our lungs will every 5 minutes or so will do an involuntary sigh, and we're not really even aware of it or cognitively aware of it, but it's so that our lungs will expand to create a full vacuum so that we're not kind of the alveoli, let me trip over that word, kind of expand, because if we're shallow breathing all of the time, then we're not using our lungs to the full capacity. So we have this inbuilt mechanism to sigh every 5 minutes. So we can kind of mimic that natural sigh using this physiological sigh, and it's a really powerful way to down-regulate your nervous system and bring you back into that state of calm. So that would probably be my go-to any sort of movement. So especially if you are someone that works online on your computer, so you're in an office or at home, when we stare at our computer screen, you think about the sympathetic nervous system is essentially honing you in on what is directly in front of you in order to keep you safe. So by looking at our computer screens, we are kind of putting ourselves into that sympathetic state, which is why when we walk away from the computer, we could be like, whoa, I just feel like a bit overwhelmed by everything. And so if you're at your computer, then making sure that you take breaks regularly, looking out to a horizon is a really beautiful way to do that. If you can't look out a window to a horizon, then closing your eyes and imagining a horizon is another really beautiful way to do that, because we're expanding our kind of sense of consciousness to what our environment is, right? So we're not just stuck in this little a tunnel of what's directly in front of us, but there's actually a whole environment around us that we can then kind of orient to and expand into as well. So that's a really helpful one. I could go on and on and on about lots of different resources, but definitely checking out my Instagram I put so many different free techniques and tools on my Instagram for people to follow along with and to learn on there as well. But they would kind of be my go-to daily ones. So dance party, physiological sigh, and imagining or looking out onto a horizon and giving yourself a break from the computer screen.
Yes, 3 super, actionable, easy to understand, easy to implement strategies. Thank you, Anna. I just have 2 questions. So the physiological sigh, you said pursed lips. Is it an audible sigh, and is it something that, extending that exhalation noise is helpful there?
Yeah, it can be. I think it depends on your context. So if you're in an environment where you don't want people to know that you're breathing really loudly, like you can do it really quietly and just breathe as slowly as possible. I find that sometimes when we're in an anxious state, it can be really difficult to understand how to slow down our breathing in a like functional way. And
Mm.
so having pursed lips kind of gives us that tactile stimulation of
Right,
feeling
yeah.
the air on our lips is a really beautiful way to slow down that exhale. So
Right.
you could use sound along with that if that helped you, give you that feedback. You don't have to, but whatever works best for you in allowing you to actually extend that exhale as much as possible.
That's a really great cue. And understanding, like you've already mentioned to us, that everybody's different, but how long would somebody expect to do the physiological sigh practice for before they were starting to feel like their nervous system was coming back down?
Yeah, I would say you could probably do it 2 or 3 times in a row and you'd start to see some positive shifts happening once you've done it just for a few times. And so generally I just do it once or twice and that is enough to kind of give me a bit of a break.
Mm-hmm.
But you can do it as many times as you want, just listening to your body and your nervous system. If you start to feel dizzy or not feeling quite right, then maybe taking a pause on that. But I'd say
Mm-hmm.
3 to 5 times generally.
Okay, yeah, that's
Yeah.
really manageable. And my other question is around looking out onto the horizon. I think that's such a lovely idea. Is there something there that I like that you made the distinction between the tunnel versus sort of something more expansive? Could we relate that to that feeling of when you feel overwhelmed or you feel like things are really big and that, we almost have a bit of a sense of self-importance, like, our what's happening to us and in our world is everything. But then when you feel lucky enough to be somewhere where there is expanse in nature, whether you're looking out at an ocean or something, it gives a sense of insignificance to what you're thinking is this enormous, all-encompassing, all-consuming feeling that actually you're just part of this huge horizon and that things are smaller and more manageable. Is that have I made a
I like
helpful
I think that's
related
very helpful.
analogy there?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I love looking up at the night sky, right? Because it just reminds you that you're just this little speck on this like miracle of a planet that we're hurtling through space and
Mm,
time together. And it's really quite amazing that we even exist. And I think that allows us to shift our perspective on a physiological level. Like I said, like our sympathetic nervous system kind of focuses in on a singular point, so our vision actually gets better when we're in the sympathetic state as well. So when we shift our focus to actually take in more of our environment, especially green environments, which are very relaxing to our eyes
mm,
as well, it down regulates, it physiologically down regulates that sympathetic state. So there's a kind of practice called orienting to your space. And so especially if you are someone that is in like the flight response, so you're like, oh, got to check the exits when I get to a social gathering so I know how to get out of here
mm,
quickly. Like orienting to your space so you actually take in your full environment is a really, really helpful way to kind of give a sense of safety to your nervous system as well. And so
mm.
that is fundamentally so we're not honed in on these singular points and we don't have that tunnel vision. But I love what you said too, because I think that expanding our vision expands our sense of self to be belonging to something greater than us as well. So
Mm,
what we are currently going through is not going to last forever, but it is also not everything that is occurring in the world as well. And so when we can
mm,
kind of place ourselves in context of the environment, it shifts a lot of that weight that we might be feeling as well.
mm. Yeah, I feel an enormous sense of gratitude at the moment because, and I love, it's such a privilege to be able to speak to people like you, Anna, because you're adding, some evidence and some science to what we sort of in the world anecdotally understand, but maybe we don't understand why. So, it's a really common practice for me a few years ago when I was writing my PhD, when I felt, really caged in and, at the computer all day. I started a practice where at lunchtime I would go for a walk without my phone somewhere green. And I don't know why. I don't know why I felt that pull that I had to leave. I love podcasting and I love listening to music when I'm walking, but for some reason, I just intuitively knew that I needed to be without that. And I had to walk, certain places around my environment where there was going to be a lot of trees and a lot of grass. And truly, even if it was sort of between a meeting or between, you know, I didn't have a whole lot of time, even if it was 5 or 10 minutes, the break in the green, and it was almost as if I could connect dots and I could solve problems in a different way when I returned. So, and the other sense of gratitude I have is, you can't see from this angle, but I am sitting at my desk in front of a huge window looking out at trees. And there's something about the movement and about the sort of transient nature of the systems that really does calm me. So I'm very lucky to be able to look above my computer screen and see that whenever I want. So what you've done in terms of giving us these strategies is allowing me, and I hope our listeners, to connect to, if we naturally do these things already, there is a reason that we do them. And I think, you know, the reason this podcast is called The Habit Nerd is because I really do want to add integrity to, you know, just these practices, that, you know, we are sort of steeped in research and, you know, rooted in some practice and some science here, which, you know, you've really added some credibility to this for us today. So thank you, Anna.
Thank you very much. And hopefully I help people feel like they can navigate things in a way that feels best for them too, because if you make sense in what you're doing, I feel like the most common thing people say to me is, oh, I was doing that all along and I didn't know why. But like you said, we intuitively know what to do. Sometimes we just need a nudge and give ourselves permission to actually do those things, because it's not weird or strange or anything out of the norm to do those things. So give yourself permission to listen to your natural intuition when it is giving you those kind of pushes.
Yeah, that's hugely empowering. And, you know, that it's only weird if you label it weird, you know, like if your body feels safe in that, and if that's something that gives you some comfort, go for it. You know, that's certainly what, you know, the message that we'd want anybody, you know, to gain from any sort of any quote unquote advice that we give. You know, take it, but contextualize it. You know, you're a full being walking around in the world. Make it work for you. And if it doesn't, try something else, and that's okay as well. Yeah. Now, Anna, I've gained so much from this conversation already. As I said at the top of our work, you know, you've released a book recently, The Vagus Nerve Reset, which I will link to in our show notes, and I'm really encouraging my listeners to go and check out. But is there a final message that you'd like to leave us with to help us live a more remarkable life?
I really suck at doing these like inspirational things at the end. And I think just following on to what we've said, like, you are naturally wise when it comes to knowing what works for you. Listen to your body and you will find the answers that you need. If you can't find those answers, then always reach out to community for support.
That's as inspirational as we could ever expect, Anna. So certainly you don't suck at that. What about for those listeners wanting to connect with you and gain more from your excellent work? I am a testament that, you know, you are hugely generous on your Instagram in, you know, the strategies that you share, and, you know, the free educational content that you gift us with. How can our listeners connect with you?
Yeah, Instagram is the best place at Anna the Anxiety Coach. I also have a free membership program called the Kind Mind Club, which is kind of an extension of what I have on social media, but with some more support. So if you are wanting to put together your own regulation rituals and figure like what that looks like for you personally within community, then the Kind Mind Club. So you can find all of that through my Instagram or my website, annatheanxietycoach.com.
Fantastic. That's going to be really helpful and hugely generous. I'll be checking out the Kind Mind Club when we wrap up the interview for sure. So Anna, just a final huge thank you from me on behalf of me and on behalf of our audience for your time and your expertise. And you know, we'll, as I said, gain a huge amount, you know, even just with those sort of zooming out big ideas, but those really mini actionable bite-sized practices that you've been so generous in sharing with us today.
My absolute pleasure, Bree. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of The Habit Nerd. I hope you found some new inspiration, learned something new, or gained a fresh perspective. If you did enjoy the episode, I would be really grateful if you could please leave a 5-star review, as it helps the show get in the ears of new listeners, plus it should only take you 5 seconds. If you're keen for more tips and insights, then head over to Instagram and follow Habit Nerd.